So one of the things that I believe in is that sometimes things happen that are just so enormous that the idea that you can just sit by and assume that you're not going to be affected by it is just fanciful. You might not like it, but it's actually going to happen, and it's happening all around us, and we're dealing with it. And in fact, Markham's presentation actually, I think, actually encompassed that, where things are actually happening, and we're uncomfortable with what's actually happening. We don't quite know why, but we're uncomfortable with it, but we're benefiting from it. And here's a man who's actually started a business that probably couldn't have been in business 5 or 6 years ago. So technology and development is constantly evolving and constantly bringing up new opportunities. The things that I'd concentrate on today are these 3 things. So my life tends to revolve around conversations at the moment in these 3 topics, which is APIs, or apps, as you might know them as, metadata, and the Internet of Things. Which is the resolution on this isn't that hot. So if we look at APIs, in the application world, APIs are king. The standardization of building applications on standard platforms where the energy can go into the creativity rather than the functionality and the plumbing is what's actually happening. This is what's enabled people like Apple to have an app store with 300,000 apps in it. Okay, 299,992 of them are rubbish, but the rest of them are actually quite good. But all those applications work on a standard set of application protocol interfaces, which are fixed and standard. I don't want to bore you with the idea of what an API is, but if I had to explain it, is if you're an application developer and you're writing for a PC or an Apple, you don't want to write the code for the keyboard every time you actually write an application. So someone's actually come up with a keyboard API that is actually a standard set of protocols, and you just add it onto your application. Okay, so think of application development as that way. And what's happening is, unfortunately, the set of resolution on here isn't that good, but the API, so Google Maps, Twitter, YouTube, Flickr, Facebook, everybody's got APIs. Everybody has. And what they do is they take these APIs and they build them into services or applications, and they tend to be a thing called a mashup, where I take 2 bits of information and I join them together. What that might look like, there's a website in the UK called Zoopla. It's a website for buying houses. You go to it, you type in your postcode, and it comes up and it tells you the price of your house. You put your postcode, put your number on it, and it also says your house is worth less than you thought it was, which is always a bit disappointing. But more importantly, and frighteningly, is it actually tells you how much you paid for it. So this has become a bit of a shock to some people in the UK, that actually what they paid for their house is now public consumption, and your neighbour knows how much you paid for your house, and more importantly, and more disappointing, you know how much you paid for yours by comparison to theirs. So that's an interesting thing. So what they've done there is they've gone out and they've used API-based applications. They've gone in, there's an API base for collecting all the information from the estate agents and bringing it into one place and presenting it into one website. But they've also gone to the local authority and gone to the land registry and uploaded the land registry data, which is now sorted and indexed in a way that can be included in an API platform, and added it to the application. So this organisation has gone out to the web, take 2 different bits of information and produced a 3rd value, which is a company called Zoopla. And what's great about it is that my house is worth about £100,000 less than I paid for it. And the reason for that is that it's taken an average of the houses. So now I can go into this website and I can click a box, and it actually brings up a box, not unlike the middle picture there, to add some more data into it. So it says, do you have double glazing? Is it aluminium or plastic? Have you converted your 4th bedroom into something else? Have you got an extension? Do you have a shed? Do you have a garage? Whatever these things actually are, and you tick the box into there. And what it's done, it goes back into the system, and everyone else has done the same thing. And it looks at the average value of your 1930s house with PVC double glazing and says your house is now worth a few dollars more than you thought it actually was. So you add more and more and more data. And the more and more data you add to something, the more accurate the information becomes, the more valuable the subject that you're inquiring or trying to discover becomes. So metadata, information about data, becomes more and more and more valuable all the time. And when I put that in there, interestingly, it brought my house up to the average price, which is, quite a cool thing. Unfortunately, what I didn't realise because now I'm inundated with people trying to swap my plastic PVC in my house for aluminium, and I've got various other people and other services offering me great deals on new roofing and all sorts of stuff. So metadata is being sold to everybody to generate revenues and values in areas that we've never actually thought about. I didn't get the option, by the way, that when I joined Zoopla, not to make my information or information about my property available to other people. Okay, so metadata is becoming really important. So the link between API-based applications and metadata has become really, really important. And in the commercial world, I'm starting to hear the language of apps. So apps is a thing to describe internet-based protocol applications, things that you run on your smartphone and your devices. And applications are things that companies have. So applications are company services, and apps are the way that those companies communicate with their customers. So it's a very different situation, a very different go-to-market and approach. The next thing is the Internet of Things. So, Gary knows I've been going on about the Internet of Things in a hardware company for about 10 years. They all think I'm some nutter. The Internet of what? They don't really get it. So the Internet of Things has really come to the fore just recently. So smart metering, the ability for you to see what's going on in your house via a meter and what's being consumed. So there are probably somewhere in the region of 1 trillion devices out there by 2020. There's going to be more things generating information, feeding it back to somewhere than people on the planet. It's quite a frightening thing. But how do you use that, and how do people actually generate revenue from that? So the Internet of Things, that's the things connected to the Internet that then have metadata applied to them, that are served up to an application is what it's actually all about. So these three things are the things that the future is actually revolving around. And sometimes it's quite exciting. Sometimes it's full of bull and people don't quite know what they're actually doing around it. But the bottom line is this is where it's going. To give you some indication of this, so these are the sort of little bit of work I did last year around the amount of API-type applications across the last decade, and the types of companies and the numbers of APIs that have actually come. So we've gone from nowhere at the beginning of the decade to now thousands of API applications actually in the marketplace, and you'll recognize some of the brands. But when we come to calls, this is the amount of individuals pinging a company to do something with them. And it runs into the billions. And you've got Google, 5 billion API calls a day. This is huge amounts of transactions, of clicks that are actually going on in the marketplace. eBay, 8 billion API calls a month. Amazon, 100 billion objects stored in their Amazon S3 storage platform. It's absolutely massive. And this whole thing has actually grown up right alongside traditional enterprise organizations that have traditional applications and infrastructure. An application sitting on a server, connected to a piece of wire, connected to a network, connected to a piece of wire, connected to a piece of tin, connected to a piece of tape, with lots of minions around, running around doing things and plugging things in and making this thing actually work. So while all these people are over here like some Fritz Lang movie, all these other people actually over here managing these huge amounts of infrastructures and millions of people and millions of things going on with very, very, very few people. Okay, so it's a very different go-to-market around APIs and the internet. And the one I've pulled up here is Netflix. So we all know what Netflix is, the killer of Blockbuster. Instead of trolling off down to Blockbuster to pick up your tape, I now actually sign up and I stream video directly to my home. So you'll see there's two or three inflection points there. So the inflection point in October 2010 was the advent of the smart TV, the whole idea of having internet-based TV, and Netflix became the standard platform that actually came up with Samsung televisions. So the ability to actually connect your television and actually stream the video, that was one of the inflections. And the second inflection was BT in the UK, making Netflix their platform of choice for streaming video. So, and you can see the impact it actually has on a business. It just goes stratospheric. So, the technology, APIs, web-based applications, streaming video and media is really, really important. But interestingly, is all those companies are actually collecting metadata about you, just like the previous speaker talked about. They're talking about, they're looking at your viewing habits, what you're watching, when you're watching it, how many devices you're watching on it. If you're on Sky, for instance, are you watching it mobile? I mean, the whole idea of being able to watch high-definition television on my mobile phone is sort of quite, sometimes you've got to stop and, you know, pinch yourself, you know. I remember, you know, working with ITV, ATV in the Midlands and BBC Midlands, you know, everything was massive. You know, cameras were massive, everything was massive. You know, the whole idea of actually being mobile in my brain in my lifetime is just quite spooky a little bit. And some people have moved on and some people haven't. So I'm a great believer in this. So having said all that, I'm a great believer in digital Darwinism. You know, this is when basically behavior of society, technology evolve quicker than corporations or companies' ability to adapt. And I think both the previous speakers have actually alluded to this, that actually it doesn't matter what you're trying to do as an organization. If you don't move quickly enough, everything will actually just swing around the outside of you. You might not like it, but I'm sorry, but that's what's actually going to happen. And if you go back to the applications, so we all work for large organizations, we want to buy an application, we write an RFI, we write an RFP, we get lots of people come in and pontificate about what's good, what's bad, what they should be doing, and it takes forever. Okay, and at the end of it, we have to have a test, then we have to actually have a rollout to a small group of people, beta testing, and then it just takes forever. And of course, in the internet of applications, I can actually deploy applications in weeks, days. And the thing that actually challenges whether an application is good or bad is the social network environment. So when you buy an application on your smartphone, what's the first thing you look at? You look at the stars, don't you? You know, if you're going to buy an application for something, you just don't. If you've got 3 applications, one's got 250 people have looked at it and it's got 1 star, and you've got another application that's got 800 people looked at it and it's got 5 stars, you've got to be a pretty, you might do it that way, but most people would choose the one with 5 stars. So social democracy is actually determining what's good and what's bad. Okay? But it doesn't mean that the application with fewer stars is actually worse. It just means that socially, this other application is actually more preferable. Okay? So, so the ability to upload an application, trial it, store some data, get rid of the application if you don't like it, store another application, access the same data that you store with the previous application is we're doing that at home. So the idea is that we actually go home to experience modern, dynamic, exciting application IT infrastructures, and we go to work not to. So it's a challenge for enterprises about how they can actually bring this more modern application environment. So we've got a situation where today people are uninhibited by access platforms. I mean, my mother, God bless her, you know, she's on the internet. I mean, it's just beyond her really, but she's got about 4 or 5 things that she does, including shopping on the internet. She's trained herself to actually be able to understand how to actually do that. And just like a good rat animal, a lab animal, she can actually do about 8 things. But she feels connected. She is part of the modern society. And when her friends come around, she proudly shows them the new web page that she's actually gone to. So it's quite an exciting moment in time for 85-year-old women coming around for coffee. It's quite spooky to see, you know, 6 or 7 women sitting around a coffee table talking about the latest application they've actually got. Bizarre. So this new generation is connected to customers. They're reaching organizations, game-changing movements across the world. Again, previous speakers spoke about that, the Arab uprising. The ability to actually make a communicate with millions of people and get an immediate impression. You know, I won't say how old people actually are, but I remember sitting down and wanting to watch news at 10. The only time I could find out what was actually going on was news at 10. And there was a big fight. So whether it was ITV News at 9 or BBC News at 10, there was just 2 news programmes that the entire UK actually spent most of their time waiting to actually happen. The news programme was one of the most watched programmes on television. Not anymore, because news is disseminated, it's available everywhere. So the idea that you're going to sit down, make a cup of tea at 5 to 9 or 5 to 10 and sit down and watch news at 10 has gone completely, you know, because social democracy has actually decided that actually we don't want to do that anymore, and technology has enabled us to actually absorb information and news on the fly and on the go. And the last one, so despite this potential of connectivity, and businesses are still struggling to understand the impact of this connected communization, I can't even say the word, communization, yes, you read it. So the point I'm making here is that always, I'm going to organizations and I'm sort of saying, what are you doing to communicate with your customers? And it's quite bizarre. You know, in my brain sometimes I have a situation where I go in the morning and I've got to go back to 1998 or 2003 and 4 and have a communication, a discussion with a customer. It's like a Groundhog Day. You know, I'm having this conversation, but I'm natively a salesman. Rule is, sell to the customer the way they want to be sold to. So, you want to be sold to in a 2002 style. I will adopt a 2002 style and sell you some stuff, because that's what you buy. Okay, and they go off and they go and buy some stuff from a few other people, and they stick it in a room, and they get some other people to connect the stuff together. And so all this stuff's being connected by people, and the people become middleware, because this stuff can't work without these people connected to it. In the afternoon, I'll go to another organization, and they don't buy stuff, they buy services. They buy outcomes. They're not interested in what's being said. They're interested in what it is. Now, I think the phrase, and I'm always smile when I hear it now, is the phrase of cost to serve. So I've come from a background of, cost to acquire, return on investment, all these type of phrases. But actually, the one that's really coming to the fore now is cost to serve. And if you have a cost to serve model, your matrix that you actually use to discover what that is very different to an ROI. And it's very, very different. So there's an interesting stat, just to show that if you don't adopt this technology, of the original Fortune 500, only 71 of them remain in business today. And if you go in and look at the companies over there, someone said it earlier, it's Eastman Kodak, a lot of companies actually were part of this original process. Because they didn't adopt and adapt technologies, they've gone out of business. So just because it means you are big today, that does not mean you're going to be big tomorrow. And if you don't evolve and if you don't adapt, you're likely to become a victim of Darwinism. Sorry, so just a statement from a session I attended last year, actually, which is, businesses develop innovative products, distribution channels, and stronger customer propositions will gain significant competitive advantage, irrespective of sector. So this technology is for everybody. How they use it is what people are actually struggling with. Okay? If you don't do this, you're just going to fall into difficulty. And if you look at some of the companies that are falling into difficulty, it's not necessarily a vertical that's going out of business. So Habitat went broke in the UK, but IKEA are still doing really well. Last time I looked, they're actually selling the same stuff, beds, furniture, in-house stuff. In fact, Habitat had high street stores. You can go and talk to people and you can buy stuff. You go to IKEA on a Sunday, you've got to be slightly demented to actually sit. I don't quite get why people want to sit in a queue for 2.5 hours to go into an IKEA store, but they do. So try and work that one out if you're in retail. I want to try and make my customer service. We were talking about customer service earlier with Ryanair. He must sit there and actually just think, just how much more can I piss my customers off and still they give me money? It must become a sort of a challenge for them, and he'll sort of say, you can say what you like about my business. If you don't like it, fly with someone else. And people don't. So, the whole challenge and the whole thing around retail consumerism these days is just changing. The whole idea that just because you've got a great product and you've got a great customer service and you've got a great website, that somehow you're going to be successful is flawed. It's a lot more dynamic than that, and there are people out there being successful that don't do either of those three things. So it's an interesting time. So technology is changing, so I was trying to come up with an example of what we might have been using 10 years ago and today, so here we go. So I've got the first Apple Mac versus today's phone. A couple of points on there, so if you look at the size of the RAM, it's twice as much. The amount of capacity is about the same. The amount of processing power is more than twice as much, but obviously, clearly, it's a fraction of the size from that point of view. So in 10 years, we've moved from something that actually weighed 15 kilos to something that actually fits in your pocket and you move around, and the battery lasts, well, it's an Apple. It lasts as long as an Apple wants it to last. But bottom line is, in 10 years, this is how fast it's actually changed. So it's interesting when you speak to companies and you say, so what's your medium, long-term plan for your business? I know what it is today. So what does your business look like in 3 years' time? What does your business look like in 5 years' time? How can you determine what your business is going to look like in 5 years' time when technology is moving to the point where it completely transforms itself and offers opportunities and examples of how you can use, in this particular case, data and information and data mobility to actually develop a business? So you get companies like Amazon selling books 5 years ago, today a $3 billion services company. And I work in an industry that wants to slag Amazon off. It's a web services company. They had a data center down in some godforsaken part of America somewhere. There's always some negative story about Amazon, but they're growing. They're a $3 billion business, growing at 64% a quarter. So someone loves them, and their argument will always be, well, I'll set this service level, I'll set this portfolio of products, and if people don't want to buy it, they can go somewhere else. So not quite the Ryanair of IT, but a similar sort of philosophy. If I can't deliver the service you want, go somewhere else. But they've got thousands of customers and millions of dollars, and they're making quite a lot of money last time they published on it. And the last one then was to show how technology moves, and this is something that dear to my heart, photographer. Yeah, you know, just have a room all blacked out, had all the kit. You know, I'd take all my pictures, and you know, in order to distribute it, I'd have to put it in post to people to take it around to their house. Whereas today, you know, I've got argumentatively, you know, better quality pictures in some cases, just on a small memory card, and I can globally distribute information instantaneously. And of course, we're all Twitter users, so we all know how to use Instagram. We take a picture, we share it with people instantaneously. So it's quite a remarkable change. And of course, technology has made average people actually quite competent. So you go and buy a camera today for £99 or even £49, and the quality of picture that you can get from this, even though you've never taken a picture in your life before, is actually of a standard that would have been unavailable to people only 10 years ago. So again, technology is changing. So back to the metadata piece. So obviously there are people in the room familiar with metadata. Don't forget, I'm normally presenting to this people that go, meta what? They've got no idea what it actually is. So, I normally use this to present to them, is that we've always used metadata. And when we used to take those pictures on the back of it, and we've all seen it, you know, I've got old sepia pictures from my family. At the back it sort of says who the family are, the date, and where it was taken, sort of written on the picture, or it's written in the album. But today it's actually been replaced by this type of interface where I actually take a picture and I can put huge amounts of metadata in. As we said earlier, you know, what was it taken on, what were the circumstances, what was the GPS location, and I can add my own metadata to it. So there are organizations now that sell applications that you can upload this metadata into their application, and you can add your own metadata to it to actually improve your own library about how you search and discover things. So metadata is becoming really important. But more importantly is things like retention. So if you're an enterprise organization, you know, can I use metadata to actually apply retention policies to the information that I've actually storing? And the answer is yes. So the idea that you can use metadata to actually have content control is also relatively new. I mean, metadata itself isn't new, but the difference here is that in the City of London, there's a large organisation that we've just done a deal with, and they've replaced 2 applications that they used to run to do content management, and they've reverted to a pure play using metadata to control and orchestrate their information. They've written their own application using these sort of policies that I've just taken a snapshot out of one of the decks. So metadata is not just about information, but it's also about controlling and managing that information. You can do the same thing. So here's an example. We've all done facial recognition. We're all familiar with that. So this is a couple of slides that I've had to take. So I can't tell you who actually uses this, but it's obviously quite clear who would use this sort of thing. So video surveillance. So a couple of ne'er-do-wells turn up and decide that actually they want to kill a few people, and that's what they go off and actually do. So how do we actually find out who these people are? How do we find out where they've gone, who they've associated with, all that sort of stuff? Well, we can do the usual investigative stuff, you know, find out who they are, find out who their families are and their friends, and do all that good legwork stuff that the police do such a great job at. But when it comes to video surveillance, sitting in a room, watching video in real time, looking for somebody that actually might look like the person you're actually looking for can be a bit of a nightmare. So normal search procedures just do not work in a modern world of video surveillance. What I really want to do is I want to be able to search just a few clips. That's what I really want to do, but how do I get to those clips? So first thing, before I go and tell you how we do that, you know, you want to be able to do real-time analytics. You know, you want to be able to sort of see whether you can not see just who their face is, but actually what they're wearing. How high they are, how tall they are. You know, are they carrying a red bag, blue bag? Do they wear glasses, not glasses? So this particular application here does all that, and it stores it all under metadata. So it actually has a metadata profile at the back end of it and some pretty smart software that enables you to actually take a picture and it will come back and say, male, female. It's not accurate, obviously, clearly, because people with long hair, but it's a better way of actually doing it. But it's really good at doing colours and bags, whether someone's wearing glasses or not. And it's actually pretty accurate about the height thing. When they do the testing on it, it's actually normally about 98% accurate when it's actually doing height assessments. So here's the page for it. So what you're able to do is go to this file that's actually stored God knows how much video over a period of time. Instead of having to trawl through it, I can actually search a time limit on it. I can actually put some information around the types of things. It's a facial recognition, whether I want someone with a red bag, you know, or somebody with bald heads, or whatever other phrase I want in it. It will actually go into the archive and actually just bring back that information. So it's reducing the amount of stuff that you as an investigator are actually looking at, and it's quite scary. And sometimes when I you know, when you look at what happened in Boston and how quickly they managed to get to people and actually find out who these people were, it was quite impressive, and I wouldn't put out of the mind that they didn't use this sort of technology to at least get to the point where they could actually find where people had gone and who they're associated with. So this is all using metadata against information that you're storing in a digital format. So quite scary stuff, but actually this is actually done in the video surveillance environment, but I'll guarantee you that somebody will be looking at about how they can turn this into some sort of value around a business. So a couple of examples of companies that we deal with, I deal with, and how they're using metadata and APIs and web-based applications to actually deliver services. So eBay. So I try not to get a picture of a tin, but apparently I'll get fired if I don't come to an EMC presentation and show you a picture of a tin. So, you know, job done. Tick. Can you mark that down, Gary? Thank you very much. So eBay. So global presence, 190 countries. They traded almost $68 billion worth of stuff on their website, and there are almost 18 million eBay applications downloaded. So what's interesting with that little slide there is the word 18 million applications. So, you know, I come from an enterprise organization. Rolling out an application for 2,500 people can take several years, and then to manage it and actually control it. And if I want to update it, it's a major pain in the butt. You know, so when it comes down to the big IT companies these days are not the traditional Coca-Colas, Ford, and the traditional conglomerates. It is internet-based organizations, millions of people downloading millions of applications, trading with them in real time, all over the world, globally, 24 hours a day. You know, serious IT infrastructure. We said earlier they've got 100 million active users, 300 million items for sale. This is slightly more. They allow us to use these numbers because these are 2011 numbers. They've grown their business at about 30% a year, so you can imagine these numbers are actually going to be bigger now. But interestingly, they've got 15 petabytes of storage on traditional infrastructure, which is a lot of stuff. They've got 8 petabytes in their object store, so that's where you store all your pictures. And they've got 60 petabytes in Hadoop clusters. So this is where they do all the managing of the data and the information and what you're doing, what you're buying, who you're buying it from. You know, if you've bought, you know, the one they use to demonstrate is Star Trek. You know, so if you're a collector of Star Trek memorabilia, they can go in and find out who all the other Star Trek memorabilia sales people actually are and get them together. So one of the things they've brought to the business is little collections of people, social groups. There's a Star Trek social group that they all communicate with each other through a social networking system that's actually being deployed inside eBay. So it's quite huge. But on the object store business, so this is a place where they're storing unstructured data. So in this case, pictures, but I guess it could be PowerPoint, words, all that sort of stuff. So I normally use this slide when I'm talking to an international organization because they run this in the States from 2 data centers, and they have about 4 administrators, not on it all the time, but they've got 4 administrators that are tasked with manage this environment. And they manage that just with 2 data centers and 4 people. I've got another company based here in Ireland, actually, another internet company. They don't have anywhere near that level of content, but they have 17 data centers, and they have 5,500 filers, and quite several hundred number of people actually administering it and running it. eBay, currently their SLA is over 4 years. It's 9 nines. In fact, they haven't actually been down. They've had an impact on performance a couple of times, but they've not been offline. This other company has actually been offline in that same period of time 8 times. And 2 of those quite significant periods of time. So architectures are changing, and internet-based architectures are the way to go. And if you try and run an internet-based architecture on a traditional type hardware platform, it will cost you so much money, it will be quite painful. The challenge is that buying this software, buying this infrastructure tends to cost more in acquisition cost. So unless you actually build a cost-to-serve model, you will not work out actually how you can save money. And I'll give you just one example to not be too boring about it, is that you can actually upgrade this stuff non-disruptively. So there's no concept of forklift upgrades, which tends to be the bane of most IT organizations. So this object storage business, using metadata, how do we do that? When everything gets a unique ID, it's volume sensitive, it writes in HTTP REST, which is a protocol for the internet. It's CRUD, which is create, read, undo, and delete, which are the primary things you actually want to do when you're actually uploading pictures and managing stuff. It's policy specific, so in other words, they can determine when the picture actually comes in about what type of picture it is, what the format is, and they can convert the format, so you don't know it. Although you may have presented it in one format, it will actually present it back to the system in a format that's more efficient for the infrastructure. And also it'll make it available to everybody, whether they sync it and async it or crossover distance. And there's all sorts of stuff around protecting that information you've got there. They upload 52 million images a day, which is quite a lot. And one of the biggest problems is deletion. So they keep everything for 30 days. If you don't delete it, they'll delete it. It's quite a very, very large environment. Lots of things actually going on, but managed by so few people, because it's all policy driven. There aren't people turning up and doing stuff. How am I doing for time? So? Okay, right, okay. So their object store as a service, so it provides a file object functionality. It uses the APIs. It's the implementation of the messaging system they've actually got, so they can actually use it now, the internal messaging system. And it's basically saved them a fortune. So when we replaced their existing infrastructure, they had about 16 people actually managing it on a daily basis. That's forgetting all the other administrators around the outside. So when they deployed this, they reduced the number of people and they reduced the footprint. And in the 4 or 5 years they've actually had this Atmos object store environment in place, they've not increased the administrators at all, but they've actually more than quadrupled the amount of content they're actually storing in the device. So so when you try and work out a return on investment on something, how do you work out a return on investment on something where as it grows, you don't actually increase the people? And when I say a lot of return on investments, it's all about, they don't work in the administrative charges inside a system, inside a program. And you see a lot of service providers not making any money because they go out and win a piece of business off a customer, buy some hardware, try and manage the service for 3 or 4 years and find that they've got more people managing it at the end of it than they did when they started, but they weren't built into the original P&L, and therefore they don't make any money. So it's a real marginal business. I don't know what's in Ireland. I'm not too sure how it's here, but we've already had 2 or 3 companies in the UK go broke. The biggest being 2E2, which was a relatively large company because they did a lot of public service stuff. But they killed themselves because they just went out and bought tin. I mean, I know because I know 2E2 quite well, and throughout my entire selling career with them, the only thing they ever knew was the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And that the bottom line was they were destined to go broke under that model. And all they tried to do was get every vendor to sell them what they were buying last time cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. But they would not automate their environment and they would not drive people out of their business. And ultimately, it cost them. And every business that's gone out of business at the moment, it is a people-laden business delivering a service. And until you remove that and automate many of the practices and policies in this environment, then you are screwed. And metadata is going to be one of the ways that you're going to actually be able to actually add policy and processes without actually having people involved in it. So if you're going to do anything, just make sure that you actually build it on some solid foundations. So, at the moment, this technology is moving so fast that the traditional period of time for an RFP can be 6 to 8 months, or even longer if you're in public sector. And we just closed a deal yesterday that's 18 months in the gestation period. Well, I can tell you now, probably, if you start an RFP today based on technology and kit that was available today, that by the time you come to implement it, that kit would have changed. They won't be able to give you a quote for what they originally talked to you about because it would have moved so much. So it's everything that's being compressed down, and the public sector is really getting screwed because of it. And they tend to be buying older technology. So when I go out and talk to organizations, their ability to make a decision, if it's time-bound over a period of time, it will always be about price. And if they're not time-bound and they want to actually deliver a service, it tends to actually shrink. So it's a very different model. So I end my piece there. So hopefully you sort of found that useful. I'm around all day if you want to ask me anything in particular. I've got a couple of little demos on my laptop. So if you want to sort of see a couple of live customers, I've got a customer in Australia that's actually doing what we just talked about with with you guys. I can show you how that actually works, and I'll gladly show you it. Okay, thank you very much.